Some stories stay with you, not because they're loud or fancy, but because they remind you of something true. This one came to me years ago, passed down like a worn Bible from hand to hand. It's about a drifter named Silas, a man with empty pockets and a tired horse who rode into a valley where folks whispered about a girl they called the monster. What he found there changed everything he thought he knew about beauty, about courage, and about what it really means to stay. I share it now because, well, maybe you need to hear it too. Maybe we all do. The cantina went quiet the moment he pushed through the door. 5 men at the bar turned their backs. The bartender wiped the same glass 3 times without looking up. Dust motes hung in the amber light, like they'd forgotten how to fall. Silas Drifter stood in the doorway, feeling the silence press against his chest. 17 years on the road had taught him what this meant. He wasn't welcome. He wasn't even seen. "Whiskey," he said. The bartender slid a glass across the counter, still wouldn't meet his eyes. In the corner, an old man sat alone, white beard, hands like knotted rope. He was the only one looking at Silas, looking hard, the way a man studies a horse before buying. "I reckon you're heading up to Montero's place," the old man said. Not a question. Silas hadn't told anyone where he was going. His horse was still dusty from the eastern road. Saddlebags near empty. "How'd you figure that?" The old man smiled. No warmth in it. "Son, every man who rides up that hill comes back down running. Every single one. If this story's already got you leaning in, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from today. As my grandmother used to say, a story shared is a blessing doubled." The Montero hacienda sat on the hill like a tomb with windows. Silas tied his horse to the post and studied the place. Big house, adobe walls 3 feet thick, but the paint was peeling. Weeds choked the garden beds. The whole estate had the feel of something slowly dying from the inside. A woman opened the door before he knocked. 60 years old, maybe more, hands rough as saddle leather. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just turned and walked, expecting him to follow. The hallway stretched long and dark. His boots echoed on the tile. Somewhere above, floorboards creaked. Someone was up there, watching. The study smelled of old paper and candle wax. A man sat behind a desk of carved walnut, his back to the window. The light made him a silhouette all shadow. No features. "Sit," Don Elias Montero said. Silas sat. The old man's face emerged as Silas's eyes adjusted. 65, maybe 70, deep lines carved around his mouth, eyes that had stopped expecting anything good a long time ago. "You need work," Don Elias said. "I need a son-in-law." Silas's hand tightened on the arm of the chair. "Come again. My daughter." Don Elias placed a small photograph face down on the desk. "Marry her. You get land, cattle, this house when I'm gone." "And what does she get?" The old man's jaw shifted. A long pause. "Someone who won't run. Why would anyone run?" Don Elias pushed the photograph closer, but kept it face down. His fingers pressed hard against the backing, like he was holding something underwater. "They call her Devil's Eyes," he said. "One blue, one brown. Folks around here, they're superstitious. Ignorant. They think she's cursed." His voice cracked on the last word, just barely. "She's been alone her whole life. 20 years in this house. No visitors. No friends." Silas stared at the photograph. The urge to flip it over burned in his chest. "You can't see her before the wedding," Don Elias added. That's the condition. If you look first, you'll leave. They always do. Upstairs, a piano began to play, slow, measured notes, a melody Silas didn't recognize, beautiful and strange, like something learned in complete solitude. His eyes lifted to the ceiling. Someone was up there, right now, listening to every word. Silas woke before the roosters. Gray light seeped through the small window of his room. The bed beneath him was softer than anything he'd slept on in years, but his body had forgotten how to rest. 17 years of sleeping with one eye open did that to a man. He lay still, staring at the ceiling. The wood beams were hand-hewn, old-growth pine, put up by someone who knew what they were doing. This house had been built to last, to shelter generations. And yet it felt empty as a church on Monday. The piano had stopped sometime past midnight. He'd listened to it for hours, the same melody repeating, each time with slight variations, like someone working through a problem they couldn't solve. When the music finally died, the silence that replaced it was worse. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. His boots sat where he'd left them. Toes pointed toward the door. Old habit. Always ready to run. The hallway was dark. No sounds from the upper floor. He moved quiet. The way he'd learned to move in places where noise meant trouble, and found the back door unlatched. Outside, the air tasted clean. Dew soaked the overgrown grass. Mist hung low in the valley, and somewhere down in the town, a church bell began to ring. 5 times. Dawn was still an hour away. The chicken coop stood near the edge of the property, a rough structure of pine boards, gone silver with age. A figure moved inside, hunched, slow, methodical. Silas walked toward it. The woman from yesterday, Rosa. He'd heard Don Elias call her, stood scattering corn from a dented tin pail. The chickens clustered at her feet, pecking and shoving. She didn't look up when he approached, but her shoulders stiffened. She knew he was there. "Couldn't sleep," he said. Rosa kept throwing corn. Her hand moved in the same arc, over and over. "Well, nobody sleeps well in this house. Not anymore." Silas leaned against the fence post. The wood was rough under his palm, splinters waiting to bite. "How long have you worked here?" 32 years. She glanced at him now, just a flicker. "I was here when the girl was born. I was here when her mother died, bringing her into this world. I've been here every day since." The chickens fought over the last kernels. Rosa watched them with no expression. "You're the 5th one," she said. "5th what?" "5th man Don Elias has brought here. He's been posting notices in 3 different towns for 2 years now. 5th man, he's offered the same deal." She turned to face him fully. Her eyes were dark, deep-set, carrying the weight of too many disappointments. The others lasted 1 night, 2 at most. They asked questions, got scared, rode off before sunrise. Silas didn't move. What scared them? Rosa's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. The stories, the whispers. Folks in town say she's cursed. Say her mother made a deal with the devil and the girl was the payment. She spat on the ground. Stupidity, ignorance. But men believe what they want to believe. What do you believe? The old woman set down her pail. Her hands were shaking, not from cold. Silas realized, but from something else, something that looked like anger held too long. "I believe," she said slowly, "that a girl has spent 20 years in that house because people are afraid of what they don't understand. I believe she sits by her window every night, looking down at the road, waiting for someone, anyone who won't run away. Silas's throat tightened. She writes letters, Rosa continued, every day, has done it since she learned to hold a pen. Letters to a person who doesn't exist yet, a person she hopes will come someday. The old woman's voice cracked. 15 years of letters, tied with ribbon, stacked in boxes under her bed, and not one of them has ever been read by anyone but me. The mist was lifting now. Sunlight crept over the eastern hills, turning the dew to gold. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. Has she ever hurt anyone? Silas asked. Ever done anything to deserve this? Rosa laughed. A short, bitter sound. That girl is afraid of spiders. Mister, she cries when the barn cats catch mice. She's read every book in that house twice over because she's got nothing else to do. The old woman stepped closer, close enough that Silas could smell the corn dust on her clothes. She ain't a monster. She's just lonely. The loneliest person I've ever known. Silas looked up at the house. The second-floor windows caught the early light, turning them into mirrors. He couldn't see inside, but he knew someone was up there, maybe watching, maybe hoping, maybe already expecting him to leave like all the others. His horse was still tied at the post, saddled, ready. He could be gone in 5 minutes, ride down into the valley, through the town, out into the desert where nobody knew his name. He'd done it 100 times before. Running was easy. Running was what he knew. But Rosa's words kept turning in his head. 15 years of letters, waiting for someone who won't run. He thought about his own life, the towns that didn't want him, the jobs that dried up, the way people looked through him like he wasn't there. He knew that feeling. He knew it like he knew his own hands. "Where's Don Elias?" he asked. Rosa's eyes widened, just slightly. "In his study, same as always." Silas pushed off the fence post and walked toward the house. His boots left tracks in the wet grass. Behind him, Rosa said nothing, but he could feel her watching. The study door was open. Don Elias sat behind his desk, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "I'm staying," Silas said. The old man's hand froze halfway to his cup. "Why?" Silas thought about the question. There were a dozen answers he could give the land. The money, the fact that he had nowhere else to go. All of them true. None of them the real reason. "Because I know what it's like," he said finally. "When nobody sees you." Don Elias stared at him for a long moment. His jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. Then he nodded. Once. Slow. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Silas turned and walked out before the silence could grow awkward. In the hallway, he paused. The floorboards above him creaked soft footsteps. Moving away from the top of the stairs, she'd been listening. The general store smelled of flour and tobacco, and something sweet rotting in a back corner. Silas pushed through the door and the bell above it jangled sharp and loud. 3 women near the fabric bolts turned to look. Their conversation stopped mid-sentence. One of them, gray hair pulled tight. Mouth like a knife wound, whispered something to the others. They gathered their things and left through the side entrance, skirts rustling against the wooden floor. The shopkeeper stood behind the counter. Bald head, thick spectacles, hands that never stopped moving. He was arranging tins of tobacco when Silas walked in. He kept arranging them now, not looking up. "I need supplies," Silas said, "for a wedding." The hands stopped, just for a moment, then started again. What kind of supplies, candles, white ribbon, whatever folks use for these things? The shopkeeper finally looked at him. His eyes were small behind those spectacles. Measuring. You're the one staying up at Montero's place? It wasn't a question. In a town this small, nothing stayed secret for long. That's right. Marrying the girl. That's right. The shopkeeper's mouth twisted. Something between a smile and a grimace. He turned and began pulling items from shelves, candles wrapped in brown paper, a spool of white ribbon, a small box that might have held something fancy once. He set them on the counter without care, the candles rolling toward the edge. $12, he said. Silas knew it was too much. A month ago, he would have argued. Now he just pulled the coins from his pocket, most of what Don Elias had given him as an advance, and set them on the wood. The shopkeeper counted the money without touching Silas's hand. He swept the coins into a drawer and went back to his tobacco tins. No receipt, no thank you, no goodbye. Silas gathered his things and walked out. The sun hit him hard. Midday heat. The kind that pressed down on your shoulders and made every step feel like wading through water. He squinted against the glare, adjusting the packages under his arm. The first stone hit the ground near his feet. He stopped. 3 children stood in the alley between the general store and the blacksmith. 2 boys, maybe 10 or 11, a girl slightly younger. Her dress patched at the knees. They were grinning. The oldest boy had another stone in his hand. Devil bride, the girl sang. Marry her and run and hide. The boys joined in, their voices pitched high, mocking. Devil eyes will make you cry. Devil bride will make you die. Silas stood very still. The oldest boy threw his stone. It skidded past Silas's boot, missing by inches. The children laughed high, sharp sounds that echoed off the adobe walls. My pa says you're plumb crazy, the boy shouted. Says only a fool would marry that thing up on the hill. Silas's jaw tightened. His hands wanted to do something, grab the boy, shake him, make him understand. But these were children, repeating words they had heard from adults, believing lies because they'd never been taught any different. He turned and walked away. Crazy man, crazy man. The chanting followed him down the street, fading only when he rounded the corner by the livery stable. His boots felt heavier than they should. The packages in his arms weighed nothing, but his shoulders ached like he'd been carrying stones for miles. The church sat at the end of the main street, small and white, its steeple casting a long shadow across the dirt road. Silas hadn't planned to go there. His feet just took him. The door was open. Inside, the air was cool, thick with the smell of old wood and candle wax. Rows of empty pews stretched toward a simple altar. Sunlight streamed through windows of colored glass, throwing patches of red and blue across the floor. A man knelt near the front, arranging flowers in a clay vase. He was 55, maybe 60, with gray hair cropped short and a face that had seen plenty of hard weather. His black coat was worn at the elbows, his shoes scuffed. When he heard Silas's footsteps, he turned. Well now, you must be the one from Montero's, he said, not accusing, just stating fact. Seems like everyone knows. The priest smiled. It was the first genuine smile Silas had seen since riding into this valley. Small town, son. News travels faster than horses. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. I'm Father Thomas. You look like a man who could use a cup of tea and a chair that doesn't judge him. Silas hesitated. Churches had never been comfortable places for him. Too many memories of being told he wasn't good enough, wasn't clean enough, wasn't wanted. But Father Thomas was already walking toward a small door beside the altar. "Come on," he said over his shoulder. "The tea's already hot. Mighty shame to waste it." The priest's quarters were cramped but clean. A narrow bed, a desk covered in papers, a small stove where a kettle sat steaming. Books lined every wall, more books than Silas had seen outside of a library. Father Thomas poured tea into 2 cups. One of them chipped at the rim, and handed the good one to Silas. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the only other chair. "I reckon your feet must be tired from carrying all that weight." Silas sat. The tea was too hot to drink. He held the cup anyway, letting the warmth seep into his palms. "You baptized her," he said. "The girl, Hope." Father Thomas settled into his own chair. His eyes were kind, but sharp. The eyes of a man who'd heard every confession and still believed in redemption. 20 years ago, spring of 1860. Her mother died bringing her into the world. The whole town climbed to see the baby. He paused, staring into his cup. Then they saw her eyes. One blue, one brown. You've heard the stories. Hard not to. Father Thomas nodded slowly. Folks around here call it devil's eyes. Old superstition. Goes back generations. 2 different colors means the child was marked. Cursed. Some of the older folks wanted Don Elias to send her away. Give her to an orphanage in the city. Somewhere no one would know. His voice hardened. He refused. Kept her in that house. Protected her the only way he knew how. By hiding her from the world. Silas's finger tapped against the cup. Once, twice, 3 times. Is she what they say, cursed? Father Thomas laughed. A short, tired sound. Son, I've known that girl her whole life. I've watched her grow up through the letters she sends me, through the books she reads and returns with notes in the margins. She's the most thoughtful, most gentle person I've ever met. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. And I'll tell you something else. In all my years of hearing confessions, I've never once heard her speak an unkind word about the people who've made her life a misery. Not once. Silas looked out the small window. The Montero hacienda was visible on the hill, its windows catching the afternoon light. Superstition is easy to believe, Father Thomas said quietly. It gives folks something to blame, something to fear that ain't themselves. He set down his cup. But the truth is harder. The truth is that girl has spent 20 years paying for the crime of being born different, and the only monsters in this valley are the ones who put her there. The church bell began to ring. 3 o'clock. Silas stood, leaving his tea untouched. Much obliged, he said, for the tea and the truth. Father Thomas walked him to the door. His hand rested briefly on Silas's shoulder, a firm grip. Steady. The wedding is in 4 days, the priest said. I'll be the one performing the ceremony. He paused. I hope you're still here when the time comes. Silas stepped out into the sunlight. Across the street, a man leaned against the hitching post. Young, maybe 30, expensive clothes, a face that was handsome in the way a rattlesnake was beautiful, sleek and cold, and waiting to strike. He was watching Silas with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man pushed off from the hitching post and walked toward Silas like he owned the street. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. His boots were polished, his shirt crisp and white despite the dust that covered everything else in this town. A silver watch chain glinted at his vest pocket. Money, old money, the kind that came from land and cattle and generations of knowing you were better than everyone else. "Well now, so you're the one," the man said. Silas stopped walking. The packages shifted under his arm. The candles pressed hard against his ribs. The one what? The one fool enough to marry the Montero girl. The man smiled wider. Teeth too white, too perfect. "I'm Marcus Kane. My family owns the ranch east of the valley. We've been neighbors with the Monteros for 40 years. He extended his hand. Silas looked at it. Soft palm, manicured nails, the hand of a man who'd never worked a day in his life. He didn't take it. Marcus let his hand drop. The smile stayed, but something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of something cold. "Not much for pleasantries. Are you? Not much for wasting time." Marcus laughed. The sound was sharp, practiced. "I like you. Direct, honest." He fell into step beside Silas as he started walking again. "Mind if I walk with you? I reckon I've got a few things you ought to know. About the girl. About what you're getting yourself into." Silas kept walking. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. The sun was angling west now, stretching shadows across the dirt road. "I heard you rode in 2 days ago," Marcus continued. "Heard you've got nothing. No money, no family, no prospects. Just a tired horse and an empty saddlebag." He clicked his tongue. "Don Elias must have seen you coming from a mile away. A desperate man is an easy mark." Silas said nothing. "You know I was offered the same deal. Right, 3 years ago. Don Elias came to my father, hat in hand, practically begging someone to take his daughter off his hands." Marcus shook his head, a gesture of mock sympathy. "My father laughed him out of the house, said he'd rather see the Kane name die out than be mixed with that." They had reached the edge of town. The road forked here, one path leading up to the Montero hacienda, the other curving east toward what Silas assumed was Kane land. He stopped. "You have something to say," Silas said. "Say it." Marcus's smile faded. For the first time, Silas saw the real man underneath the petty cruelty, the wounded pride, the desperate need to feel superior. "I saw her once," Marcus said. His voice dropped, losing its practiced charm. "The girl, I was 17, snuck up to the house on a dare, climbed the trellis to her window." He paused, jaw tightening. "She was standing there, looking right at me. Those eyes." He trailed off. His hand moved to his chest, fingers pressing against his shirt like he was checking his heartbeat. "One blue, one brown," Marcus continued. "But that ain't what got me. It was the way she looked at me, like she could see right through me, like she knew everything I'd ever done wrong, every lie I'd ever told." He shook his head. "I nearly fell off that trellis, ran home, and didn't sleep for a week." Silas studied the man's face. The bravado was gone. What remained was something smaller, something frightened. "Sounds like you scared yourself," Silas said. Marcus's face hardened. The mask slid back into place. "I'm trying to warn you, friend. That girl ain't natural. There's something wrong with her, something dark. You marry her, you're signing up for a life of misery. Maybe, maybe not. You think you're different, you think you're special." Marcus stepped closer, close enough that Silas could smell the pomade in his hair, the whiskey on his breath. Every man who's come through here thinking he'd be the one to save the poor cursed girl has ended up the same way, running. Because once you look into those eyes, you know there's something wrong. Silas met his gaze, held it. Or maybe, he said quietly, they ran because they saw something in those eyes they didn't want to face, something about themselves. Marcus's face went pale. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Silas shifted the packages in his arms. Much obliged for the warning. I'll keep it in mind. He turned and walked up the road toward the hacienda. He didn't look back, but he could feel Marcus's eyes on him the whole way, burning into his back like a brand. The sun was setting by the time he reached the house. Orange and red streaked across the sky, painting the adobe walls in shades of fire. Rosa met him at the door, took the packages without a word, and disappeared into the kitchen. Silas ate dinner alone in the small room off the main hall. Beans, cornbread, coffee that was more bitter than he liked. The food sat heavy in his stomach. Marcus Kane's words kept circling in his head, persistent as flies. Those eyes, something wrong, something dark. He pushed away from the table and walked outside. The night was cool, the stars sharp and bright overhead. He stood on the porch, breathing the clean air, trying to shake the feeling that had settled into his bones. From somewhere above him, the piano started again, the same melody as before, slow, searching, beautiful in its sadness. He listened for a long time. Then he went to check on his horse. The stable was dark. He grabbed the lantern hanging by the door and struck a match. The flame caught, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. His horse nickered softly. Recognizing him, Silas walked to the stall, ran his hand along the animal's flank, checked the water bucket, the feed bag. Everything looked fine. Then he saw the reins. They hung from the hook where he'd left them. But something was wrong. He lifted them, held them up to the light, cut, clean through, both straps, a knife, sharp and deliberate, not rats, not where. Someone had been here. His fingers traced the severed leather. The edges were smooth, precise, done by someone who knew what they were doing. He turned and looked out the stable door, toward the east, toward Caneland. The hills were dark shapes against the stars, silent and watchful. Rosa was in the kitchen when he came back inside, washing the dinner dishes by candlelight. She looked up when he entered, saw his face, and her hands went still in the soapy water. What happened? Silas set the ruined reins on the table. Rosa stared at them. Her face didn't change, but her knuckles went white against the edge of the basin. "The Cane boy," she said. It wasn't a question. "Seems likely." Rosa dried her hands on her apron. Slow, deliberate movements. "He's been causing trouble since Don Elias turned down his family's offer to buy this land. Thinks if he makes enough problems, we'll give up and sell. Will you?" Rosa looked at him. Her eyes were hard. "This house belongs to that girl upstairs. Her mother built it. Her grandmother is buried out in the garden. We ain't going anywhere." Silas nodded. He picked up the reins, turned them over in his hands one more time. "I'll need new ones," he said, "and a lock for the stable door." Rosa watched him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, the faintest crack in the wall she kept between herself and the world. "You're still staying," she said. "Told you I would." He walked to his room, closed the door behind him, and sat on the edge of the bed. The reins lay across his knees. He could still smell the leather, the faint scent of horse sweat and hay. Outside his window, the piano music drifted down from the second floor. The melody had changed, faster now, almost hopeful, but under the music, carried on the night wind. Silas heard something else, hoofbeats, distant, but unmistakable, coming from the east, and they were getting closer. The hoofbeats faded before they reached the house. Silas stood by the window, watching the darkness. His hand resting on the sill, whoever had been riding out there had turned back, changed their mind, or decided to wait for a better moment. He didn't sleep much that night. Morning came gray and cool, clouds hanging low over the valley. Silas washed his face in the bayet, pulled on his shirt, and went downstairs before the sun cleared the eastern hills. Rosa was already in the kitchen. She stood at the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. The smell of corn mush and coffee filled the small room. She didn't turn when he entered, but she knew he was there. "Breakfast in 10 minutes," she said. Silas nodded, though she couldn't see it. He poured himself coffee from the pot on the counter, wrapped his hands around the warm cup, and waited. Rosa's spoon scraped against the bottom of the pot. Steady rhythm. Scrape, stir, scrape. Then she stopped. "There's something for you," she said. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an envelope, cream-colored paper, edges slightly worn. A small seal of red wax held the flap closed. In the corner, written in careful script, a single letter, H. Silas set down his coffee. "She didn't sleep last night," Rosa said. Her voice was flat, but something underneath it trembled. "Stayed up writing. Threw away 5 drafts before she finished this one." She held out the envelope. "She wanted me to give it to you. Said you don't have to read it if you don't want to." Silas took the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive. He could feel the weight of the words inside. "Does she know about last night, the rains?" Rosa shook her head. "I didn't tell her. Don Elias didn't either. No point worrying the girl about things she can't control." Silas turned the envelope over in his hands. The wax seal was stamped with a small flower. A rose, maybe, or a lily. He couldn't tell. "Where can I read this alone?" Rosa pointed toward the back of the house. "There's a hill behind the orchard, big oak tree at the top. She used to play there when she was small, before—" She trailed off. "Before people started calling her a monster, before she stopped going outside." Silas tucked the envelope into his shirt pocket, against his chest. He could feel it there, pressing against his heart. "Much obliged," he said. Rosa turned back to her pot. Scrape, stir, scrape. "Breakfast will be cold when you get back." The hill was steeper than it looked. Silas climbed through the orchard, past rows of apple trees heavy with unripe fruit. Their branches twisted and gnarled with age. The morning mist clung to the grass, soaking through his boots, leaving dark tracks behind him. The oak tree stood alone at the crest of the hill, its trunk wider than a wagon wheel, its branches spreading out like arms reaching for the sky. Someone had carved initials into the bark years ago, E. Plus L. M. The letters faded and stretched as the tree grew. Don Elias and his wife, Silas guessed, before everything went wrong. He sat down against the trunk, his back to the rough bark, and pulled out the envelope. The wax seal broke with a soft crack. The paper inside was folded twice, the creases sharp and precise. The handwriting was small, neat, written in purple ink that had smudged slightly in one corner. He began to read. "To the man who stayed, I don't know your name. Rosa told me. but I've already forgotten it. Names don't matter much to me anymore. What matters is that you're still here. 3 days now. That's longer than any of the others. You don't have to stay for me. I'm used to being alone. 15 years is a long time. But time moves differently when you have nothing to measure it against. One day is the same as the next, the same books, the same piano, the same view from my window. I've been watching you, when I can, through the curtains. You walk like a man who's been walking a long time. Your shoulders are tired. Your boots are worn. I wonder where you've been, what you've seen. What made you end up here, of all places? Father says you agreed to marry me. I don't know why. Money, maybe, or land. Everyone needs something, and we have more than we need. That's fine. I don't expect love. I don't even expect kindness. I don't know what I want. That's a lie, I do know. I want someone to talk to. Someone who doesn't flinch when they see my eyes. Someone who treats me like a person instead of a problem to be sieved or a curse to be avoided. Rosa says I'm too old for fairy tales. She's probably right. But I keep thinking, maybe this time will be different. Maybe you'll stay. Not forever. Just long enough for me to remember what it feels like to have a conversation that ain't with myself. I like books. Dickens is my favorite. Do you read? Probably not. Most men don't. But if you do, I have a whole library upstairs. You could borrow anything you want. I'm rambling. I do that. Rosa says it's because I don't get enough practice talking to real people. She's right about that too. If you leave tomorrow, I'll understand. Everyone does. But if you stay, please don't stay because you feel sorry for me. I've had enough pity to last 3 lifetimes. I just want someone to see me. Really see me. Is that too much to ask? Maybe it is. H. Silas read the letter twice, then a third time. The wind picked up, tugging at the paper, threatening to tear it from his hands. He held on tight. His throat felt thick. Something was pressing against his chest from the inside, pushing outward. He thought about the towns he had passed through, the people who looked past him, like he wasn't there, the jobs that dried up, the rooms he had rented by the week, always ready to leave at a moment's notice. 17 years of being nobody, of mattering to no one. And here was this girl, this woman asking for the same thing he'd been searching for his whole life. Someone to see her. He folded the letter carefully, matching crease to crease, and slid it back into the envelope. Then he tucked it into his shirt pocket again. Left side, over his heart. The walk back to the house took longer than the walk up. His legs felt heavy. His mind was full. Rosa was waiting in the kitchen. The breakfast had gone cold, just as she'd predicted. She didn't say anything when he came in, just watched him with those dark, careful eyes. "I need paper," Silas said, "and a pen, and ink." Rosa's eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "You're going to write back?" "I'm going to try." She led him to a small desk in the corner of the parlor. The wood was dusty, the chair wobbly on one leg, but there was paper in the drawer cream-colored, like the letter he'd received, and a pen, and a small bottle of ink. Purple ink, the same kind Hope used. Rosa saw him notice. "She orders it special from Santa Fe," she said quietly. "Says it reminds her of lavender. Her mother used to grow lavender in the garden." Silas sat down. The pen felt awkward in his hand. He'd never been much for writing. School had ended early for him, and the years since then hadn't offered many opportunities to practice. But he'd promised himself he would try. He dipped the pen in the ink, set the nib against the paper, and began. To H, I ain't good with words, never have been. But you asked if I would talk to you like a person, so I'll try. My name is Silas. I've been on the road 17 years. I've seen a lot of places, but none of them felt like anywhere I wanted to stay. Until now, I don't know why I stayed. Not for the land, not for the money, maybe because I know what it's like to be looked at like you're nothing, to be invisible, to wonder if you even exist when nobody sees you. You asked if I read. I don't. Much. But I'd like to learn. If you'd teach me, I ain't going anywhere. Silas. He folded the letter, sealed it with a drop of wax from the candle on the desk, handed it to Rosa. Give this to her, he said. Rosa took the letter. Her face didn't change, but her hand shook slightly as she held it. That night, the piano played again, but the melody was different. Lighter, faster, almost like laughter. Silas lay in bed, listening, and for the first time in 17 years, he smiled in the dark, but the smile faded when he heard the sound. Footsteps, outside his window, moving slow and deliberate through the garden. Someone was out there. Silas rolled out of bed and grabbed his boots. The footsteps had stopped. The night was silent again, but the silence felt wrong, heavy, watchful. He pulled on his boots without lacing them, grabbed his knife from the nightstand, and moved to the window. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint outline of the garden wall. He waited, counted his heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Then a shadow moved near the stable. Silas was out the door before he finished thinking. His boots slapped against the tiles of the hallway, then the packed earth of the yard. The cool night air hit his face, filled his lungs. He ran toward the stable, knife in hand. The shadow was gone. He stood in front of the stable doors, breathing hard, scanning the darkness. The moon was hidden behind clouds. He could barely see 3 feet in front of him. Something scraped against wood. Behind him. He spun around. 3 men stood in the yard. They'd come from the orchard. The apple trees stretched all the way to the boundary with cane land. Rosa had told him once. 2 of them held clubs, thick oak branches, stripped of bark. The third was Marcus Kane. Evening, Marcus said. Silas didn't move. His grip tightened on the knife. 3 against 1. Bad odds. Worse in the dark. What do you want? Marcus stepped forward. His face was barely visible in the dim light, but his voice carried that same cold amusement from before. Just a friendly conversation, man to man. He nodded toward the knife. You can put that away. We ain't here to hurt you. Then why the clubs? Marcus smiled. Insurance. The 2 men spread out, flanking Silas on either side. Farmhands, by the look of them. Big shoulders, thick arms. The kind of men who spent their days hauling hay and their nights drinking away the ache. I've been hearing things, Marcus said, around town, about how you're still here, still planning to go through with this fool wedding. He shook his head. I thought you'd be smarter than this. I reckoned wrong. Maybe I ain't smart. No, you ain't. Marcus's smile faded. Do you know what folks are saying now? They're saying the Montero girl pushed a maid down the well 10 years ago. Killed her. That's why Don Elias keeps her locked up. Not because of her eyes, because she's dangerous. Silas's jaw tightened. That's a lie. Is it? How would you know? You've never even seen her. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that Silas could smell the whiskey on his breath. You don't know anything about her. You don't know what she's capable of. You're just a desperate drifter who stumbled into something way over his head. I know enough. You know what they told you, what they wanted you to believe. Marcus's voice dropped. Let me tell you what I know. I know that girl ain't natural. I know anyone who gets close to her ends up regretting it. And I know that if you marry her, you'll spend the rest of your miserable life wishing you'd listened to me tonight. Silas said nothing. His eyes moved between the two men with clubs. They were tense, ready, waiting for a signal. Here's what's going to happen. Marcus continued. You're going to get on your horse. You're going to ride out of this valley, and you're never going to come back. Do that, and we'll forget this ever happened. And if I don't, Marcus tilted his head, then we'll have to convince you. The first blow came from the right. Silas saw it too late. The club caught him across the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He stumbled, caught himself, tried to bring the knife up. The second man was already swinging. The oak branch connected with his ribs. Air rushed out of his lungs. He doubled over, gasping. A boot caught him in the side, and he went down. The ground was wet. Recent rain had turned the yard into mud thick, cold, sucking at his hands and knees as he tried to push himself up. Another blow landed across his back. He collapsed face first into the muck. The taste of dirt filled his mouth. Grit between his teeth, the smell of rotting leaves and horse manure. He tried to get up. A boot pressed down on his hand, grinding his fingers into the mud. Stay down, one of the men said. Marcus crouched beside him. Silas could see his polished boots. Splattered now with mud, could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Look at you, Marcus said softly. The great hero, the man who was going to save the monster, face down in the dirt like a pig. He leaned closer. This is where you belong. This is what you are. Nothing, nobody, just another drifter who thought he could be something more. Silas's fingers clawed at the mud. His ribs screamed with every breath. His shoulder throbbed where the club had hit. Marcus stood up. We're done here. Get his horse, put him on it, point him toward the desert and let him go. Footsteps moved toward the stable. Silas lay in the mud, his cheek pressed against the cold earth. He could feel the weight of 17 years on his back, every town that had rejected him, every job that had ended badly, every time someone had looked through him like he wasn't there. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe he was nobody. Maybe he'd been fooling himself, thinking he could be something different here. The stable door creaked open, and then another sound. A door slamming. From the house. What in tarnation is going on here? Don Elias's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Silas heard the more footsteps lighter, quicker, and then Rosa's voice, sharp and angry. Get away from him! Get away! Marcus laughed. Stay out of this, old woman. This don't concern you. Everything on this land concerns me. A lantern flared to life. Yellow light spilled across the yard, revealing everything Silas in the mud, the two men with their clubs. Marcus standing over him like a hunter over a kill. And something else. A figure in the doorway of the house, slight, dressed in white, a shawl pulled up over her head, hiding her face in shadow. She was watching. Silas's stomach twisted. She was seeing this, seeing him like this, beaten, humiliated, covered in filth. Get off my land, Don Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades. Now, Marcus held up his hands. We're just having a conversation, Don Elias. Teaching your guest some manners. I said now. A long moment passed. Marcus looked at the old man, then at Rosa, then at the figure in the doorway. His smile flickered. Fine, he said. "We're leaving." He turned back to Silas, still lying in the mud. "Think about what I said. The offer stands until morning. After that—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The three men walked away into the darkness. Their footsteps faded. The night went quiet again. Rosa rushed to Silas's side. Her hands were rough but gentle as she helped him sit up. "Can you stand?" Silas nodded. His ribs protested, but nothing felt broken, just bruised. Bruised and covered in mud, and more ashamed than he'd ever been in his life. He got to his feet slowly. His clothes were ruined. Mud dripped from his face, his hair, his hands. He couldn't look at the doorway, couldn't face whoever was standing there, watching. "Get him inside," Don Elias said. "Clean him up." Rosa took his arm, started leading him toward the house, and then a voice spoke, soft, clear. The first time he'd ever heard it. "Wait." Silas stopped. The figure in white stepped forward, into the lantern light. The shawl slipped back. Just slightly. Not enough to see her face, but enough to see her hand as she reached toward him. In her palm, a folded piece of paper, cream-colored, sealed with red wax. "I wrote you another letter," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Will you still read it?" The church was full. Silas stood at the altar, his hands clasped in front of him, watching the pews fill with faces he didn't recognize. They came in twos and threes, families crowding together on the worn wooden benches, children squirming between their parents. The whole valley must have emptied out for this. They hadn't come to celebrate. He could see it in their eyes, the sidelong glances, the whispered conversations behind raised hands, the barely suppressed smiles. They'd come to watch the fool marry the monster, to see the show. Father Thomas stood beside him, his hands folded over the Bible. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "They'll have their spectacle, but this is still a holy place." Silas nodded. His collar felt too tight. The suit Rosa had found for him, an old one of Don Elias's. Taken in at the shoulders, smelled of cedar and mothballs. His ribs still ached from 4 nights ago. The bruises had turned purple under the starched white shirt. The church door opened. Sunlight flooded the aisle. A collective breath rippled through the crowd. She entered. A white veil covered her completely face. Shoulders, hands folded beneath the lace. Rosa walked beside her, one arm linked through hers, guiding her down the aisle with slow, measured steps. The congregation leaned forward. Necks craned, children stood on pews to see better. The whispers grew louder. "Can't even show her face. What's she hiding under there? Devil's eyes. I heard." Silas watched her approach. She moved carefully, each step precise, as though she was counting them. Her hands trembled beneath the veil. He could see the fabric shaking. She was terrified. 20 years of hiding. 20 years of being called a monster. A curse. A thing to be feared. And now she was walking into a room full of people who wanted to see her fail. Rosa brought her to the altar, their arms separated. The old woman stepped back, her face hard as stone. Hope stood alone. Silas could see the outline of her through the lace, the shape of her head, the slight rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed. Nothing more. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. They flinched at his touch, then slowly, carefully, wrapped around his own. "I'm here," he said, quiet, just for her. The trembling slowed, didn't stop, but slowed. Father Thomas opened his Bible, Dearly beloved, he began, we are gathered here today. The words washed over Silas like water. He barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the woman beside him, the small hand in his, the quick, shallow breaths beneath the veil, the way she stood straight and still despite everything. She was braver than anyone in this room. The ceremony moved forward. Vows were spoken. Silas repeated the words. Father Thomas fed him, his voice steady. Hope's responses came soft and clear, barely audible above the rustling of the congregation. Do you, Silas, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Hope, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? A pause. The church held its breath. I do. Father Thomas closed his Bible. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. He turned to Silas. You may lift the veil. Silas didn't move. The congregation stirred. More whispers. Someone in the back laughed a short, ugly sound. He's scared, a voice called out. Can't even look at her. Silas ignored them. He turned to Don Elias, who stood in the front pew, his face gray and drawn. You do it, Silas said. Don Elias blinked. What? You've kept her hidden for 20 years. You should be the one to let her be seen. Silas stepped back, releasing Hope's hand. She deserves that. From you. The old man's throat worked. His eyes went to his daughter, the veiled figure standing alone at the altar. His hands shook as he rose from the pew. He walked forward, slowly. Each step seemed to cost him something. When he reached Hope, he stopped. His hand lifted toward the veil, then hesitated. I'm sorry, he whispered. I thought I was protecting you. I thought... Hope reached up and touched his hand. It's all right. Father. Don Elias nodded. His fingers found the edge of the veil. He lifted it. The church went silent. Not a whisper. Not a breath. Even the children stopped squirming. Silas saw her face for the first time. She wasn't a monster. Her features were delicate, fine-boned. Dark hair fell past her shoulders, gleaming in the light from the stained glass windows. Her skin was pale, the pallor of someone who'd spent too many years indoors, but smooth, unblemished. And her eyes, one was blue, deep blue, like the sky just before dawn. The other was brown warm, rich, the color of polished oak. They were the most striking eyes Silas had ever seen, not frightening, not cursed, just different, extraordinary. She was beautiful. The silence stretched 1 second, 2, 3. People looked at each other, confusion written across their faces. This wasn't what they'd expected. This wasn't what they'd been told. An old woman in the third row began to cry. Soft, hiccuping sobs that she tried to muffle with her handkerchief. Dear Lord, the woman said, she's beautiful. More voices joined in, confused, ashamed. People who had spent 20 years believing stories about a monster were seeing the truth for the first time. Why did they hide her? All these years, we thought... Marcus Kane sat in the back of the church. Silas saw him there, alone, his face pale. His eyes were fixed on Hope, on the face he'd described with such fear and disgust. The face that haunted his nightmares. She wasn't what he'd expected. Marcus's hands gripped the back of the pew in front of him. His knuckles went white. His jaw worked, like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. He looked at Hope. She looked back at him across the length of the church. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, just stood there, small and straight and calm. waiting to see what kind of man he would choose to be. Marcus's face twisted. Something was breaking behind his eyes, something he'd built up over 13 years of telling himself stories. 13 years of believing his own lies. His hand went to his chest, pressed hard. His breathing was shallow, quick. Then he stood up. The pew creaked. Heads turned. People watched as Marcus Kane pushed past the others in his row and walked toward the aisle. He stopped at the end. His eyes met Hope's one more time. His mouth opened, closed. He turned and walked out of the church. The door clicked shut behind him. He didn't look back. Father Thomas cleared his throat. "Well then, I believe there's one more thing." He looked at Silas. Silas looked at Hope. Her eyes, both of them, blue and brown, were wet. But she wasn't crying. She was smiling, a small, trembling smile, like something locked away for 20 years was finally being set free. "You didn't look first," she said. "No. Why not?" Silas thought about the question, about the letters, about the piano music drifting through the floorboards, about lying in the mud while she watched from the doorway. "Because I already knew who you were," he said. "I didn't need to see your face." Hope's smile widened. A single tear slipped down her cheek. "You're the first person who's ever said that to me." Silas stepped forward. He lifted his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers touched her cheek, brushed away the tear. "I reckon I'll be saying a lot more," he said. "If you'll let me." The congregation watched in silence. Some were crying. Others looked confused, uncertain, like the ground had shifted beneath their feet. Father Thomas raised his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Silas Drifter." No one applauded, but no one jeered either. The silence held something new, something tentative and fragile, like the first green shoots after a long drought. Rosa stepped forward with a handkerchief. Dabbing at her eyes, Don Elias stood rooted to the floor, tears streaming down his weathered face, and Hope. Hope looked at Silas with those impossible eyes, and for the first time in her life, she didn't look away. The church doors opened. Sunlight poured in, warm and golden. They walked out together, into the light, behind them, in the shadow of the doorway. A figure stood apart from the others, thin, rough clothes, one of the men who had held a club 4 nights ago. His hand moved toward his pocket. Something glinted in the darkness. Then his eyes met Silas's across the crowd, hard, cold, waiting. Silas turned away, but he didn't forget. The man in the shadows didn't follow them. Silas saw him turn and walk away as the wagon pulled out of the churchyard, his hand dropping from his pocket. His shoulders slumped. Whatever he'd been planning, he'd thought better of it. Or maybe he'd seen something in the crowd that changed his mind the way people were looking at Hope now, the way the whispers had shifted from mockery to something closer to wonder. The ride back to the hacienda took less than an hour. Silas drove the wagon while Hope sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She hadn't spoken since they left the church. Neither had he. The silence between them was different from before, warmer, more comfortable, the silence of 2 people who had time. Rosa and Don Elias followed in a second wagon. The old man sat with his head bowed, his hands folded in his lap. He'd aged 10 years in the past hour, or maybe he'd just stopped pretending to be young. The hacienda rose up before them as they crested the last hill. Same adobe walls, same tired garden. But something had changed. The windows caught the afternoon light and threw it back like signals. "Welcome home." Silas pulled the wagon to a stop by the front door. He climbed down, then turned and offered his hand to Hope. She took it. Her feet touched the ground. She stood there for a moment, looking at the house she'd lived in her whole life. Then she turned to Silas. "Would you like to see the library?" He nodded. "I'd like that." They went inside together. The library was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway Silas had never walked down before. Hope led the way, her hand still in his, her steps quick and light. The door swung open. Books, hundreds of them, thousands, maybe. They covered every wall, stacked from floor to ceiling, crammed into shelves that bowed under their weight. More books than Silas had ever seen in one place. The room smelled of old paper and leather and dust. The smell of stories waiting to be told. Hope watched his face. "Father bought most of them when I was young. He thought, if I couldn't go out into the world, he'd bring the world to me." Silas walked to the nearest shelf. His fingers brushed the spines of his gold letters on cracked leather, names he didn't recognize. Dickens, Austen, Twain. The words swam before his eyes. "I can't read most of these," he said. "I know." Hope moved to stand beside him. "I'll teach you, if you want." He looked at her. The light from the window fell across her face, illuminating those impossible eyes, one blue, one brown, both watching him with something that might have been hope. "I want," he said. They ate dinner on the porch that evening. Rosa brought out beans and cornbread and sliced ham, laying everything on the small table between two rocking chairs. Don Elias stayed inside. "Too tired," he said, but Silas suspected he wanted to give them privacy. The sun was setting over the valley, painting the hills in shades of orange and gold. The air smelled of sage and dust and something sweet blooming in the garden. Hope ate slowly, carefully, like someone relearning a skill they'd forgotten. Her veil was gone, her face bare to the world for the first time in 20 years. She kept touching her cheeks, her forehead, as though surprised to find nothing covering them. "It feels strange," she said. "Being seen." Silas set down his fork. "Good strange, or bad strange?" She considered the question. "I don't know yet. Ask me again in a year." "I will." They ate in silence for a while. The rocking chairs creaked softly against the wooden porch. Somewhere in the valley, a dog barked. "Can I tell you something?" Hope said. "Anything." She set down her plate, her hands folded in her lap, fingers interlacing. "When I was 5, my father took me to town. It was the first and last time. He thought, maybe things would be different. Maybe people would see a child and forget the stories." She paused. "They didn't." Silas waited. "A woman spat on me, right in the street, called me a devil's child. Her husband threw a stone not big enough to hurt, but big enough to scare. Father carried me home. He never took me back." Her voice was steady, no tremor, no tears, just facts, laid out like cards on a table. "After that, he built walls, not just around the house around me. He stopped having visitors, let the ranch hands go, kept me hidden from everyone except Rosa." She looked at Silas. "He thought he was protecting me. Maybe he was, but protection can become a prison if you ain't careful. Do you hate him for it?" Hope shook her head. "I did. For a long time. But then I started writing letters. Letters to someone who didn't exist yet. Someone I hoped would come." She smiled. "And now you're here, so I suppose it was worth it." The sun dipped below the hills. The sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear, one by one, like candles being lit across the heavens. "I should play for you," Hope said suddenly. "The piano. You've heard me before through the floor. I mean, but never properly." "I'd like that." She stood, held out her hand. "Come." The piano sat in a parlor off the main hall. A grand instrument of dark wood and ivory keys. Hope settled onto the bench. Her fingers found their positions practiced, automatic. She'd been playing this piano for 20 years. It was as much a part of her as her strange eyes. Silas stood by the window, watching. She began to play. The melody was familiar, the same one he'd heard through the floorboards on his first night here. Slow, searching, beautiful in its sadness, but it was different now, stronger, more certain. Rosa appeared in the doorway. She stood there, dish towel in hand, watching the girl she'd raised play for an audience of one. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't wipe them away. Don Elias came down the stairs. He stopped on the landing, one hand on the railing, his face half hidden in shadow. He watched his daughter play, really watched her, without the veil, without the fear, and something in his expression cracked open. The music swelled, filled the room, spilled out through the open windows into the night. Silas closed his eyes. He thought about the road that had brought him here, the towns that had rejected him, the years of wandering, all of it leading to this moment, this house, this woman, this music. He'd spent 17 years looking for home. Maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was the feeling of being seen, really seen for the first time in your life. The music slowed, softened, faded to silence. Hope's hands rested on the keys. She didn't turn around. Was that all right? Silas opened his eyes, crossed the room, sat down on the bench beside her. "Play it again," he said. She looked at him. Those eyes, blue and brown, searched his face. Whatever she was looking for, she found it. She smiled, and she played. Later, they sat on the porch again. The stars were out in full force now, a blanket of light spread across the sky. The valley lay dark and quiet below them. No sounds except the crickets and the soft creak of the rocking chairs. Hope leaned her head against Silas's shoulder. Her hand found his in the darkness. "Tell me something true," she said. Silas thought about it. All the things he could say, all the truths he'd never spoken aloud. "I've been running my whole life," he said finally. "From places, from people, from myself." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I don't want to run anymore." Hope lifted her head, looked at him with those impossible eyes. "Then don't." She leaned in. Her lips brushed his cheek, soft, tentative, like the first touch of spring after a long winter. Silas turned, found her mouth, kissed her properly. The rocking chairs stopped moving. Above them, the stars wheeled on in their ancient courses. The wind whispered through the valley, and somewhere in the house. Rosa smiled and turned away from the window, leaving them to their moment. Don Elias stood at his bedroom window, watching the two figures on the porch, his daughter, her husband, together. He nodded to himself, once, slow, then he reached up and pulled the curtain closed. There is a quiet that comes after a story like this one, not the quiet of emptiness, but the kind that settles into you like dust after a long journey, heavy in places, tender in others. Some of us know what it is to wait by a window, to write letters that no one reads, to carry something inside us that the world calls strange or broken or too much. Many of us have stood in rooms full of people and felt completely invisible. Perhaps you have loved someone without ever being sure they saw you back. That weight does not need to be explained. It does not need to be fixed or understood. It is allowed to simply rest there, the way old things rest in attics present, familiar, undisturbed. And if this story stirred something in you that has no name, that is all right. Not everything needs a name. Not everything needs to be resolved. It is enough to have listened. It is enough to have stayed. Thank you for being here. Thank you for carrying this story, even for a little while.